Everyone, David Fazzino here, and in this screencast for Anthropology and World Problems being offered through Commonwealth University of Pennsylvania, I'll be discussing war, violent conflict, and weapons of mass destruction. You can see from the title slide here that there is much to consider in terms of the impact of war and violent conflict, not only in the immediate dealing with that, but also the preparations that go into that and the disciplining of society as a whole. And it takes on this sort of whimsical nature, as you can see here from the Civil Defense Office, that has a number of these posters, childlike posters almost, this idea that individuals need to be 2 jumps ahead. So thinking about what might potentially occur. And of course, this is the atomic clock or the nuclear clock, this minutes to midnight clock, as it's sometimes been referred to, is quite a heavy burden. And individuals have noted that we've gotten very close to that. Probably the closest was the Cuban Missile Crisis, although there are new estimates of the so-called minutes to midnight or doomsday clock that would also account for things like global climate change as well. So this idea of impending disaster. In an effort to prepare to deal with war and violent conflict, there has been a number of tests, above and underground tests. The largest of these was at Bikini Atoll, and that's the larger image that you can see here. If you're a sci-fi fan, I think this is probably one of the newer Godzilla films that has come out. And you can see here quite a large impact here, as those are, of course, larger vessels, Navy vessels, in the immediate vicinity of the explosion. There were some miscalculations with the explosion, and the radiation traveled fairly extensively through the Marshall Islands. Bikini still today is a contaminated site, as are other areas throughout the Marshall Islands because of this. And of course, this has had immediate impacts on the population of the Marshallese in terms of having to leave their island. And then that impact on things like food security and access to traditional food resources, and a diminished quality of foods with imported foods overall. So these whimsical designs from the Civil Defense Office is quite extensive here. The idea of the ostrich burying the head in the sand and how that's not going to help. And one has to be ever vigilant in getting ready for this, just like grandma used to do with stocking her pantry for overwintering harsh northern climates potentially. So in this screencast, we'll highlight some of those aspects, looking particularly at Masco's 2008 work, Survival is Your Business, Engineering Ruins and Affect in Nuclear America. And in this piece, Masco talks about Operation Q and how the mannequins, right, in Operation Q make their rounds through the J.C. Penney, and how this becomes integrated into consumer culture as well. Masco also discusses the idea of avoiding internal dissent and some of the discussion there of Hollywood and media. Before we get to that, I will discuss the extent of war, drawing from the Global Peace Index of 2022, as well as a discussion of weapons of mass destruction, both at the international level and within the United States. So from the visual capitalist here, you can see the extent of world's ongoing conflicts, and this is from 2021. And it does note here that we currently live in one of the most peaceful eras in human history, but that does not mean there's an absence of violence. Certainly, if you look at the number of deaths in World War I and World War II, and the extent of that, as well as the Vietnam War, quite a number of deaths. And these, of course, is just a tip of all of the violent conflict and deaths that have been caused by war. So this piece by Visual Capitalist sort of documents the violence in a number of different areas. One thing to note here as well is that around 80% of the world's current conflicts are concentrated in Asia and Africa. And you can see this distribution on these maps fairly clearly. So the Global Peace Index 2022, this is a report that's put out by the Institute for Economics and Peace, and they put this out every year. So the subtitle of this is Measuring Peace in a Complex World, and it again came out in June of 2022, and it's available at visionofhumanity.org/resources. So you can check out the entire report if you would like to. The Global Peace Index and the Institute for Economics and Peace note that the overall trend and year-on-year percentage change, essentially peacefulness has declined year-on-year for 11 of the last 14 years, with 2012, 13, and 14 being the only time period of relative decline, year-on-year percentage change. So what are we talking about here? Of course, in the media today, it's difficult to not find a news story that's out there about the ongoing war in Ukraine. And the largest deterioration of peace has been in Ukraine, followed by Guinea, Burkina Faso, Russia, and Haiti. At the same time, there have been improvements overall in Libya, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Philippines, and Algeria. This doesn't necessarily mean that those countries are ranked. If you look at the ranks, you can see them here, right here, Global Peace Index ranks. So the largest deteriorations were recorded in 5 indicators: political terror, neighboring country relations, intensity of internal conflict, number of refugees and internally displaced persons or IDPs, and political instability. And again, this is from that same Global Peace Index report of 2022. So although Ukraine experienced the largest deterioration overall in 2022, it's important to keep in mind that it still remains outside the 10 least peaceful countries. And so here they are on a rank on the right side in red, with Afghanistan being the least peaceful country, followed by Yemen, Syria, Russia, South Sudan, Democratic Republic of Congo, Iraq, Somalia, the Central African Republic, and Sudan. On the other end of the spectrum, Europe remains the most peaceful region, according to the Institute for Economics and Peace, with 4 of the 5 most peaceful countries in the world. The top 10 in terms of the peaceful countries are first Iceland, then New Zealand, Ireland, Denmark, Portugal, Austria, Slovenia, Czech Republic, Singapore, and Japan.